Hey, what's up, guys? Shuckleking here, bringing you WBE's Season 6, Week 1 Power Rankings. I'm excited for this, and with me we have my co-host. Introduce yourself.
Hey guys, how's it going? Ogalbina here. Excited to jump into Week 1.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely some great games, maybe some not as great games, maybe some connectivity issues for some of the coaches, but hopefully these things get more, and maybe some late games too. This is going up probably a little bit later into the week than what we would normally be doing in the future, but we'll see how it goes. Hopefully we'll get a little bit more of a consistent time frame for future weeks.
Yeah, and it gives us plenty to talk about too. So
oh yes, definitely, for sure. Yeah, so let us know below how this whole process is going to go. If you like our power rankings, we're going to be putting some edits in this video, so if you guys like it or if you have any changes or suggestions for this series, just let us know below. But yeah, let's maybe talk like an introduction about how we're doing the power rankings. Maybe it's a little bit different than how we're doing it for our like Week 0 power rankings, where we were just plainly looking at teams and not necessarily at a coach's skill level. How did you like approach your rankings here, OG?
So for me, obviously, this is going to be more so based on playing and how well the coach, formulated their game plan, how nice their build was, compared to, what they were playing against and stuff like that, opposed to where the Week 0 or the post-draft power rankings, whatever you want to call it, was more so based on just the objectivity of the draft and like how good I think the team synergized and things like that. This, I'm not even really considering that. I could completely not like your team, but if you play well, you prepare correctly and things like that, you're obviously going to have a much higher ranking, and I think that is going to be obviously a lot easier to rank people based on how well they objectively played and how well they formulated the game plan and, how aggressive they were and how smart they were when they're playing, opposed to just, do I like these Pokemon together and things like that. I did kind of base the rankings on my Week 0 rankings in the sense that if you were at 16 in my Week 0 rankings and you won, I'm not going to bump you up to number 1. I'm going to kind of keep it relative and kind of make it to where it's a slow, steady grind. I want to see consistency over you won Week 1, so you're in the top half, and you lost Week 1, so you're number 15, that kind of thing. So it's kind of still relative to the Week 0, but the way that I'm ranking them is definitely a lot different this week.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I honestly probably still slightly favor just like really good drafts for now. But if I could see like 2-3 weeks from like a lower ranked seed that I had of continual improvement and like really good play, then you'll be going up high you'll be skyrocketing up the power rankings. But I feel like for the most part, there's not going to be a whole lot of dips and rises from Week 0 to Week 1 for my power rankings anyway. But there are a couple, and it also doesn't mean if you win your game, you're going to automatically be in the top 8. And if you lose, you're automatically in the bottom 8 for this. It's not necessarily how it goes. And I have some coaches that won, and I dropped them in the power rankings just because I wasn't necessarily too enthralled about how they played some games.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be you can win a game and still not play it very well, unfortunately. So that's something I definitely kept in mind. And my thing is I'm not looking at necessarily, did you win? Yes, great job. It's more so, how did you win?
Exactly. So, yeah, let's get right into it and talk about Game 1 we're going to talk about, which was the game that was uploaded most recently, which was Moet against Patty Trills.
So Moet versus Patty was a very, very interesting game. Obviously, before you guys, watch this, though, you should check out the coach's side just so you can, watch the games yourself, formulate your own opinions, and, see who won and lost, because we're obviously going to be spoiling all the results of the games here, every single one of them. Starting off with Moet and Patty, which, I kind of give the spoiler warning, so I think I can say it now. Moet ended up winning that game. It was a very tough matchup for Patty, I do think. I think Moet had a great matchup. I think he prepared very, very, very well in that game in particular. The T-Spikes approach was really, really smart, especially when Patty doesn't have the most reliable grounded poison. While he does have Wheezing and it can run like Neutralizing Gas and obviously touch the ground and absorb that, it's going to want to be, Levitate in a lot of other weeks. So getting the T-Spikes up with Marini was very smart, and also the backup plan of just poisoning everything, even if those T-Spikes aren't up on the game. I think like 4 out of his 6 Mons or something like that had Toxic on them, which is really smart for a team like Patty's, who doesn't really have that immediate offensive pressure. We kind of talked about it in the the post draft power rankings, his team lacks like a really strong immediate breaker. So having a much fatter build with a lot of toxic spam, a lot of subbing, a lot of roosting, lots of protecting and things like that was a really, really smart idea in my opinion. I loved his Volcarona set as well. I thought it was really, really cool and creative. While I think Quiver Dance was still really good in that matchup and it could have definitely went crazy, it was a really good way of kind of taking advantage of Patty's more, passive build that's more so meant to chip things down for Necro. If he can just kind of sub-roost, toxic everything, and still subsequently boost his special attack with the Fiery Dance, I thought that was a really, really cool idea. And I think he went into the game saying, I'm going to try and toxic everything and just whittle his team down. And that's exactly what he did. I think he formulated a game plan, that was very smart for the matchup, and I think he executed it really, really well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think probably Moet's, I think in my top 3 in terms of like impressive victory, I think he played very well in this game. And that reflects the rankings we have. You don't see it right now. You'll see it later on in the power rankings. But I have Moet at 9, so a jump of 5 spots from week 0. And OG has him at 7. So that's a pretty big jump there as well. So yeah, we're both very high on how Moet played this game and formulated a game plan. With Patty, I don't think his game plan was necessarily that bad, setting up a weakness policy in the crowds, but I think that was a really cool set, figuring that he was able to get his weakness policy activated. I think that could have won the game fairly easily. Volibee was still a little bit of an issue that could have maybe toxic, that maybe forced the Necrozma not necessarily kill all 6 mons, but I think it would have been pretty effective if he was able to get it up. But he wasn't able to get that Necrozma strategy to work. He only traded it with the Volibee, which I don't think Patty was wanting to do going into this game. So he allowed Toxic Spikes to get up, and that wasn't great. And he definitely could have prevented Toxic Spikes in that game before the Necrozma came in. There was a play where the Mienshao was in on the Marini, and Mienshao could have killed the Marini with a Drain Punch or a knockoff, I'm pretty sure, because he knocked off the Marini anyway. The Marini was pretty low. But instead, Patty went for the U-turn on the Marini. It was able to live and get a recover off. And then Patty U-turned into the Vizually Dragon, which Moet didn't know was Vizually Dragon. That was pretty funny. Moet, you could just see that in the future. You could click, there's like a little button that'll show you what type of Vizually it is. But because he brought in the Vizually on the Marini could continuously just Toxic Spikes as the Vizually was going to continuously defog because the Vizually was already poisoned. So eventually he was able to get either Toxic Spikes on the field with the Vizually either dead or the Marini alive and Toxic Spikes still on the field. So it was a lose-lose situation for Patty at that point because Marini was able to get Toxic Spikes up and the Necrozma wasn't going to be able to win at that point. Another weird play by Patty. Towards the end, I think he still had a decent chance to win with the Mienshao. Mienshao was pretty threatening, especially because it outsped everything on his team. But the Ferroseed came in at one point on the Seismitoad, and I think at that point, Patty set up rocks, which probably didn't make much of a difference because Volcarona was 100% boots. I think he saw that earlier in the game. So he definitely should have gone for the explosion on the Seismitoad because Volcarona was able to set up a substitute, and he did see substitute Volcarona earlier in the game. So I think Patty probably was still in a losing position at that point, but I think he had a chance to win the game if he exploded on the Seismitoad. But Moet switched into the Volcarona and then got up a free sub. So there are some things that Patty, just knowing your game plan and adjusting, I would say to just try to improve that upon that for future weeks. Anything else to say?
No,
a little bit of rambling there.
I completely agree. And like you said, I just think I think he was a little bit underprepared for the T-Spikes. He probably didn't really, honestly prep a lot for Marini. Because I'll be 100% honest. When I see lower tier mons like Marini and Volibee, sometimes you overlook them in prep because you're like, that's damn Marini. What is this thing going to do to me? So I do think he might have discarded. He does have that option in the Grounded Poison. But honestly, Levitate regular Wheezing is better in a lot of matchups. You potentially probably wanted it for the Seismitoad to check that thing a little bit well. And to be fair, Levitate Wheezing just like completely walled the set that Patty ended up the set that Moet ended up bringing. I think he was knockoff Power Up Earthquake Rocks or something like that. So the Wheezing definitely took that on pretty well, but it's just the oversight and thinking I'm very viable to T-Spikes and getting kind of stacked on if I don't bring this Weezing, or if I don't bring sufficient taunt users and things like that to stop the slower Marini from, getting up the T-spikes, that was kind of his downfall. I think the game would have been much different, and honestly, maybe a little bit easier for Patty to win with that Necro, because I think that thing had a nuts matchup on preview.
Yeah.
When you're checked to a Necro is a Volibee, it's not going to be a good time in all honesty. So, that was just the biggest oversight, because I honestly, even if just T-spikes weren't up in that instance, because Moet went hard into the Volibee and got 2-hit KO'd, though I don't think he would have done that if T-spikes weren't up. He probably just wasn't very worried about it. But let's say he does, he would have won the game right there. But the T-spikes are obviously going to stop that. And again, I don't think Moet would have made the hard Volibee play if Necro wasn't at 20% in
definitely
poison.
Not. No.
But, it's just something to think about. It's just making sure I'm covering all bases. Even if it's a lower tier mon that might not be, very threatening on paper, if you don't prepare for it, it becomes a lot more threatening.
Yeah, I think Patty was saying he would have won if there weren't toxic spikes up, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think Moet just had an easier time to win that game just because toxic spikes were up.
Yeah, it just sped up the inevitable pretty much. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, we both have Patty at 13. So about a 4-slot drop for both of us. So I think he can definitely pull it back if the crowd was just a beast.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So let's go on to game 2, which is I think it's going to be the most point of contention between the two of us, and that is THATSA versus JamesWBaek. So THATSA, I think, also put up a top 3 performance of the week with Moet, and that another coach will be talking about later on. But yeah, I really liked THATSA's approach this game. He brought a Specs Politoed with actually not a whole lot of range support. He had Kingdra on the team, he had Butterfree on the team, but they were all almost like facades. He didn't really need the Politoed in this matchup, but it made him think that he was actually benefiting from rain. So it was a pretty cool tech to get James off guard, because if you're going to bring up Specs Politoed, you're assuming, it's going to be a Specs or Life Orb special Kingdra. So I think just throwing him off and making sure James kept his answers to a Specs or special attack in Kingdra, and then boom, THATSA throws a choice band of Kingdra in there. That completely, I think, threw JamesWBaek off guard. So that was a really cool way he played that game there. I like the bulky Bolton just because Bolton was so much faster than everything else on JamesWBaek's team. He was able to take advantage of that pretty well, bringing choice banded, because why switch if you don't need to? He sacked the Politoed with rain to a Scarf Thunder from Rotom, but he was fine because he was able to get a switch into Decidueye at that point. And then he sacked the Decidueye going Curse on the Umbreon just to get a free switch into Mimikyu. And Mimikyu just destroyed the game at that point. Setting up Swords Dances. James maybe misplayed a little bit with the Corviknight, but he definitely took advantage. And I think the Corviknight still would have been pretty low, regardless if James played it correctly and didn't misplay. I think it was in range for Butterfree to revenge kill Bolt and revenge kill Kingdra. I think all three of them would have been able to revenge kill at that point. Great prep with the Kingdra with Choice Band. There wasn't a negative with the Kingdra. He was going for a Choice Band at Outrages, and he was going to win the game at the end. But at one point, he was confused after Outrage, and he would have lost the game if he hit himself in confusion to, I believe it was the Rotom. He could have switched out to one of his other mons, brought the Kingdra back in, and then he would have won the game again with Kingdra Outrage. So I feel like that was a little bit of a misplay, risking that when he didn't need to. Butterfree still might have been able to win the game with Quiver Dances, but I think that was a risk you didn't necessarily have to take. But no, I really like THATSA's aggressive style in this game, which is a little bit of a negative in league format, just because a lot of leagues will use differential points as a tiebreaker. So if you're going to trade a lot of mons like THATSA did and get he got a 3-0 win, I believe, which is pretty nice, but if you're going to be trading 1 for 1 and consistently getting 1-0 wins, it's not going to help your differential in the long run, which, in my opinion, differential isn't the best way to determine tiebreakers. I think head-to-head matchups a better way to figure out tiebreakers, or a strength of schedule. That's a talk for another time. But overall, very impressed with THATSA's gameplay, and I bumped him up to slot 10 this week. which you'll see on the next slide. But yeah, that's a pretty big increase from where I had him week 0.
Yeah, so we do disagree a lot on this one. This is this was a game.
Yeah.
First, so we'll talk about James first, because James obviously is the person who lost. And
yeah,
I do want to kind of cover some things that I didn't necessarily like, both in his building and in his play, and things like that. One is obviously the Corviknight Mimikyu interaction. I think that's very, very important to kind of go over, because honestly, I think it's a completely different game. And while, yes, the Mimikyu would have gotten a fat chunk off on the Corviknight, I completely agree. However, it doesn't really matter, because I feel like the Corviknight was there just for that. It made it to where also the Kingdra couldn't lock an Outrage as freely, and if he didn't... Okay, let me start over. So it was Mimikyu versus the Corviknight. I believe it SD'd, and then he switched right into the Corvi, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he switches into
Mimikyu
it was
with disguise up.
Okay, so in my head, he switches in, right? Corviknight, phenomenal check. Especially this was a max Fizdef Corviknight. Look at James Builder. It was pretty much max. So very, very bulky. All he had to do was click Iron Head. The U-turn play, if he stayed in, which again, I don't think it's the worst play for that to stay in. While maybe he wants to keep his disguise versus something that should always beat him, he can get a big chunk off it, I suppose, and at least, force a roost, go into something else, and take advantage of the roost turn or something like that.
He did have taunt, though, to prevent the roost.
That too. But, so you can taunt and then maybe pivot out into your Bolt Hunt on the, very obvious Iron Head or something like that. Completely fair. I think the taunt SD bring, I don't think it was a bad break. I don't think it would have put in as much work if, one, he didn't U-turn, because he stays in, he has the disguise. It's little drawback for him. While it sucks that he's losing his disguise, it's little drawback for THATSA to stay in and get that big chunk off of. And you have to think about it in the position of, if you U-turn, you break its disguise, you didn't take any damage on Corvi, but you have to go into something else to either take a +2 hit or take a +4 hit, because your team is so slow. So it puts you in a bad position no matter what happens, really. In my personal opinion. So I think that was just kind of a bad play overall. And then, obviously, he has to, I believe, sack the Umbreon, which isn't a good time. And then he has to pivot right back out into the Corviknight, so he's back where he was before, except it's at +4 now, because he double SD'd. And still, he should have been in an okay position. All he had to do, it was tipped down enough, all he had to do was click Iron Head. But the kind of big crux of this game is both players, honestly, not utilizing the calc. I ran the calc myself as I was watching. A +4 max attack Jolly Mimikyu. I mean, it could have been adamant, but it still wouldn't have killed. Did 60 to 70% with that Life Orb Shadow Claw. So the Iron Defense play made no sense whatsoever. All he had to do was do just one quick clout. See, oh dang, I don't live 2 of these. I don't live two of these.
Well, you remember why he went for the Iron Defense, right?
What was the reason for the Iron Defense?
Because he thought he was going to be a Phantom Force instead of Shadow Claw.
Then that might be is that more of a VG? I know James is a VGC player. Do Mimikyus run Phantom Force in VGC or?
I have no idea.
Yeah,
I
still, that's also
didn't even know that it got Phantom Force just because it's not that viable of a move.
No, yeah, especially in singles too, where it's one Pokemon. Again, I'm not the biggest VGC guy, but yeah, I mean, I guess he can go for the Phantom Force. I don't know, but in my head, I still think your play is 100% to Iron Head, because even then, you can still kind of pivot around it. You can roost up. You can, and I don't even know the calc too. He was at pretty much full. I don't even know if Phantom Force killed from that range and things like that. So
yeah, I don't think so.
Iron Head was 100% the best play. All he had to do was just Iron Head that thing, take it out, and he still had his what do you call it? His Corvi at a decent amount of health to where if the Kings are locked into the wrong move, he could roost. It gives him a flying resist for the Butterfree in the back. He still had that thing in the back, and I think that's so much of a different game if he didn't play so awfully around the Mimikyu, because he gave up so much momentum against it. It was not a good time. What do you call it? Another thing was the what do you call it? The Delmise. The Delmise bring was very interesting. I know it got Grassy Glide, and I know it doesn't get Seed Bomb. I think it's like best, Grass Tap is obviously going to be Power Whip, but I don't know if Glide was the move, and I don't know if Anchor Shot the Bolt Hunt on turn 2 was the move. I think you want to get off as much damage on that thing as possible, because it was very, very difficult for him to pivot around. Whether it be Bandit or like Life Orb would have been, monstrous in that game too. It was very annoying for him, so it's just utilizing the calc and kind of, I don't know, realizing your end game versus different things. I don't think James played that game very well. And while that's a one, again, I don't know if he necessarily played the best either. Like early in the game, I know you said he didn't really need the rank, which is completely fair. But in draft, you want to utilize your resources, especially if you have checks in the back. I was not a fan of the Psychic play versus the Rotom, and it was another play where just no utilization of the Calc. He said, I probably live this, and click Psychic on the Electric type with his Polytoad. Even if he did live that, you get 50-60% off with that spec Psychic, and then your thing is 2-hit KO'd, or you give us some potential momentum afterwards and things like that. Yep. So I don't know if necessarily that's a play the best. He definitely put on a lot of pressure. He capitalized off his opponent's mistakes well, so you can't fault him for that. He definitely won the game, and he did well in that sense. He played better than his opponent was my main thing. I don't know if he necessarily played the best, but he played better. So obviously he gets the win, and that's commendable in itself, and that caused him to rise a little bit for me. But it was an interesting game. It was an interesting game.
Definitely, but yeah, no, I'm all on the hype trade for that, but I do want to see a little bit more gameplay before I can put him as my number one. So let's go on to game 3, which was also quite a doozy, and that was Chimpact and Vizually.
Yeah, so this game Vizually ended up winning 1-0. It was a very interesting game. They ended up not playing on LAN. I don't know if one of them just didn't have it able to set up or what was going on. Maybe they couldn't connect, something like that. But that was a little bit interesting. I think Shuckle will talk about that a little bit later on with a couple of events that happened in the game that were kind of skewed due to them having to recreate the game twice. But Vizually obviously won the game. It was a very interesting game. I don't think either player necessarily played out of their mind. But I do think that Vizually's prep was very solid. I love the Zardbring. I thought the Zardbring was great. It was great defensively versus Chimpact's team, and he was very Scizor weak otherwise, I noticed. His entire team just kind of got smashed by Banded Scizor, which Chimpact did end up bringing, so I like that a lot. And it did really, really well in that game and being really bulky and being really annoying. It was a decent Lucario check. Chimpact obviously wasn't carrying the Stone Edge, which is very, very important. So it was able to check that decently and was able to live that +2 extreme speed pretty easily with the bulk. I don't know if letting that Zard take the Toxic was the move earlier on in the game. That definitely made it a little bit more difficult on him. I think if that Zard wasn't Toxic, he would have had a lot more easier of a time. But he positioned himself well for the end game and getting that, Sharpedo set up for the end game, being smart about not letting it take chip and things like that, and kind of setting up to get that protect and get that clean with it, which is kind of what I thought his team would do. It'd be chipping things down for some of these priority or the speed boosting mons and Sharpedo and stuff like that to be able to clean up despite not being super strong in their own right. I think if Chimp just ended up getting up rocks and prioritizing rocks early in the game, he obviously won that game pretty handedly, but it ends up happening. It wasn't necessarily the craziest game, but Vizually positioned himself better for the end game, and he ended up picking up a nice 1-0 win. What did you think though?
Yeah, it was a hard game to watch, honestly. Well, first of all, the Charizard being he had to go for the roost on the Jellicent to take the Scald, because it wasn't Boots. It was Rocky Helm with Charizard. That was crazy, and I'm sure Chip was stunned that was the case, because if he got rocks up, it would have been a totally different game. Granted, it was kind of Vizually played pretty well to prevent Chimp from really getting an opportunity to reset up rocks at any point. And at the same time, I don't know if Chimp necessarily favored rocks a whole lot, because the Rotom was pretty low, and he probably assumed the Charizard was going to be Boots anyway, so maybe the chip wouldn't have made that much of a difference, but turned out it would have. But yeah, so the allotted cuts were pretty tough, and I noticed in the gameplay, the Rotom fan was a lot lower in the first part of the battle, then they had to pause and recreate, and it was at a higher HP to where there was a part where the Zeraora Volt switched on the Rotom fan. It would have killed if it was at the HP from the original part of the battle, but because they recreated it and Rotom fan was at a higher HP amount, it actually lived. And Chimpact was forced to bring in the Crocodile at that point. So it did end up actually benefiting Chimpact because he wasn't able to get the kill, because in the following play, Vizually defogged, predicting Crocodile to go for Stealth Rock. So he actually removed the rocks on Chimp's side of the field. So it was probably overall a net positive, but yeah, there's definitely negatives for the land timer, but I think trying to set that up in the future is definitely the way to go. But this week, Vizually, I have ranked as 14, and I had him ranked 13 a week before. I don't think he necessarily played that game that great. Chimp, I also had lowered down from 5 to 8. I don't think Chimpact really necessarily made that bad of plays, but, well, the one bad play I think was sacking the Sigalith earlier on to the Sharpedo, or later on, to take that Dark Pulse. He didn't have to do that. He could have made the hard switch into a Lucario there, and I think the Sigalith probably won the game. And that's another point of contention, the Sigalith set. So,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, mono energy ball without boosting special attack, which, what did Vizually bring? He brought Charizard, which is naturally a counter to it. Now, granted, Chimpact can, he has the Azera Aura and has Toxic, like, ways to handle it, but in a vacuum, Zard beats that set. He has Rotom Fan, which if it's Pain Split, probably beats that set, or stalls it out if they played on a normal land timer. So I guess the set was kind of beneficial that they weren't on a land timer, because they were able to play for a limited time in theory. There was a Tangela, which honestly probably doesn't beat the set. It does have Synthesis, so maybe it beats the set. And then Jirachi, if Jirachi was Wish, it also beats that set. So, like, there were just so many things that beat that Sigalith set, and Chimp was like so hard set on like making that win the game in conjunction with Lucario, which was a great set, and he played that really well. That's why I don't have Chimp that much lower in the rankings, because he played the end game pretty well to try to catch up there. But like, I would have gave you props if the Sigalith set worked, but it didn't, so I have to definitely question.
Yeah, I think
if there was a better set.
I think either stab just would have made it a little bit nicer. Even just Air Slash, over Energy Ball, because the fact that what did Energy Ball hit that like Air Slash didn't? Like, I know there's a Sharpedo obviously that you can't like click Psychic on and hits it super effectively, but if you boost up enough, that thing's not breaking through you and you 2 KO, it's a Sharpedo. Was there anything else like crazy that I'm totally forgetting about on Jim's team, on Vizually's team, that the Energy Ball was like 100% needed for?
I don't even think so. Like, it hits the Jirachi a little bit harder because it's stab even.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Sure.
Or even like a stored power set, like being Cosmic Power, Stored Power, and like he didn't need the T-Wave is my main thing. I don't think the T-Wave was needed on that set. So I think either stab, either Psychic or Air Slash, or even like a Stored Power, because you can kind of boost up, and at least you're getting, like, while you're not Calm Minding up or anything like that, if you get +6/+6, those Stored Powers are going to be hitting pretty hard. And you have the Energy Ball, I guess, for the Sharpedo, if that's what you're mainly concerned about. There's probably something I'm completely forgetting on Vizually's team that the Energy Ball was nice for, but I still do feel like he would have gotten more out of just dual stabs. He could have even gone like Stored Power plus Air Slash and been in a pretty good spot, or thrown in a Heat Wave maybe over Air Slash or something like that, and just kind of boosted past where Sharpedo couldn't break him anyways, because it's so frail. Like, as a Dark type, it's not checking a Psychic type that boosts up enough in its defense stats or anything like that. So it was just a bit interesting.
Yeah, I don't get that either. Like, he had Scrafty that he could have brought too. It's like, I just feel like Air Slash.
Oh, well, then Air Slash hits that. Yeah.
On the set overall, I don't see anything that Energy would have been hit that much. But Chimp didn't do a team overview, so I don't really know what the thought process was. But yeah, let's move on to game 4. So you have Chimp at 10. You had him at 10 last week.
Yeah,
so
I got them about the same.
And
I don't think I agree. I don't think he played super awful. I just didn't think it was the best showing from him. What we know of Chimpact as a great draft player, it just wasn't his best game or his best showing.
Yeah, Edda wasn't that great of a matchup either. Eddie brought it pretty close, so that's why I couldn't really fought against Chimpact that hard this game.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, bringing it to game 4, we got a Callum versus Fruitberries. So definitely a pretty cool game. Like, Callum's probably like the top 3 in terms of people I was looking out for, just because his team was like so fun to use because it's so hyper offensive.
And the
games will be really quick.
Yeah.
So, well, in theory, the game should be really quick. It seems like they also had really tough difficulty setting up the land timer, which at least they did set up the land timer. But hopefully, they won't be that discouraged, and hopefully they'll be able to learn in the future how to use it, and it'll be a lot easier for them.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I don't want them to get discouraged by using the land timer. There are resources that it's really not that bad from all the experience I've had, probably like 25, 30 games or so playing on the land.
Oh yeah, it's just the first time's
yeah.
always iffy. The first time's always awful.
Exactly. Yeah, but no, I was pretty happy about Callum's play. Where did I ranked him 6 this week, up from 9. So definitely an improvement. And Fruitberries I still had pretty low, actually the last slot. But I don't think Fruitberries also played necessarily that bad in this game. I think other people definitely played worse. I just don't like Fruitberries' team. But anyway, Callum, he played like super aggressive, like kind of like in the same boat that THATSA played, but I think Callum used a little bit more defensive switches and stuff than THATSA did. But Callum had a nice play at some point where Cabalion was in on the field against a Flygot that was scarfed into, I believe, a dragon move, and predicted the Xatu that came in and killed the Xatu with a Stone Edge. So Callum made some really nice reads, especially because I don't think he plays a whole lot of competitive Pokemon battles in general. He's been in the WBE, I believe, but I don't think he plays a whole lot. So it was pretty nice to see him get acclimated pretty quickly into the battling reign. He went for the Shell Smash on the Clefable, which was kind of weird. It wasn't that, I don't think it was even that bad of a play, but it was definitely made sense that Clefable was unaware of that game just because of all the setup sweepers that Callum has. I think it made a lot of sense that Clefable was unaware. So just making sure you're aware that Clefable could be unaware would probably be good for Callum. He went for the Toxic Spikes, which were pretty nice for him. He made some nice switches, like predicting the Magnezone to go for a Flash Cannon and went into the Cinderace. So he made a lot of really nice plays in this game, and some of the plays didn't work out. Like I remember there was a play where Rhydon was in on the, I think on the Tentacruel, and he predicted the Rhydon to switch out to go into Ditto, absorbing the T-Spikes, so he was going to go into his Cinderace. And then the Cinderace could protect, seeing what the Ditto was going to lock into. So I really like that thought process there, even if now he knows that Ditto doesn't absorb Toxic Spikes if it copies a Poison Mon. That's easily something that someone not acclimated with battles wouldn't know right away. So that's definitely fair. But I like that thought process, even if the plays didn't work out. I liked his reasoning, and he definitely had a game plan going into the battle and executed it very well. So yeah, I was pretty happy about Callum's play this week, and super excited to watch his games going forward.
Yeah, no, he has a really fun team. I talked about it too in the draft analysis thing. I think this team would be a lot of fun to use. It's just offense on offense on offense, and I think this was like the perfect matchup for him to show what a team like that can do with a very slow and more passive, not necessarily super passive, but a very slow team by Fruitberries. And I think that was kind of the main separator in this matchup, was his subpar speed tiers really showed, and it really allowed him to be exploited by a lot of just very strong offense, because his team, just nothing was able to outspeed, revenge anything, and it let a lot more of those mons really do well. Obviously the PC on matchup was terrifying. Like, the thing was nuts versus him. When you're steel types of Magnezone, it's not super good, and when it outspeeds the entire team and just can click Specs Tri-Attack barring the Alola Marowak, that's really, really scary. I did like the Alola Marowak bring a lot, and I love the Trick Room idea with Xatu, though I think maybe a teleport over a U-turn might have been a better bring. It didn't end up coming into play in the game itself, but you obviously don't need that U-turn chip, and say you do get up Trick Room, and you're for some reason slower than the one that came in, because you're Xatu, you're probably not super fast in that matchup, and just have a very slow team in general. If you turn out first and you have to go hard into your Alola, which doesn't have the greatest bulk and things like that, and you want it to break and things like that, I don't know if you want to potentially be taking that hit with your Marowak. So maybe the teleport was a better bring, but again, it didn't really end up mattering. I really like the thought process there. The main misplay that Fruitberries made, because like you said, he didn't play very bad, I don't think, at all, honestly. He didn't play super bad. He was just kind of overwhelmed by the mass amounts of offense, and I think Callum played, like you said, really aggressively and really well, despite a lot of rust showing, like the the Ditto play and things like that, not knowing that mechanic. And there was a few others that I kind of forget. Despite the rust, he played really aggressive, and that's how you have to do with an super offensive build like that. I think the biggest misplay was clicking Steel Beam with his Magnezone. That was the only thing stopping PZ from just, because at that point the Alola Marowak was gone. You at least want something to be able to kind of pivot in, or at least force out the PZ. At that point, I think it just ran through the team with Specs Tri Attack, and he had a
definitely.
He had a Magnezone that chilled at like 75%. And while again that's a PZ, doesn't take it the very best. Unfortunately, it's still a pivot. It's still something that can take that hit. While nothing else on his team really could at that point. So I think that's very, very important. Like, for example, I'm pulling up the calc right now. Max HP, I think he was actually max defensive, no HP. So I think that's also like kind of doing calcs and realizing this Pokemon does well versus me. If he was max HP, it was, he needed to Roxford to be up for it to actually 2-hit KO with the Tri Attack. But with, obviously his no HP and like max defense, I think he did try to 2, but it's still something that could take a hit. And I think that was the biggest part to kind of just seal the game. I do think Callum would have won at that point anyways, but I think that was kind of the main like misplay from Fruitberries, just kind of realizing that I need health on this thing in order to not lose to this in the end game. It's kind of thinking 3 turns ahead opposed to thinking this is the turn. I want to predict the Flygon to come in and nuke it with the, nuke it with the Steel Beam or something like that. So other than that, he didn't play super awful. It's just I think his speed tiers are really going to come to bite him in the butt this whole season. Just having Haxorus your fastest mon, and especially not bringing it that week. Not necessarily that was a bad idea. I do think Haxorus was pretty good here, honestly, versus Callum's team. But regardless of that, having that as your fastest mon, playing against offensive builds like this, he's always going to have a rough time trying to deal with them.
Oh yeah, definitely for sure. So yeah, let's get into Game 5 this week, which was Automatthic versus Magnitude. I was very excited about this matchup, and it was a very good game, I felt like.
Oh yeah, no, it was definitely a really, really good one to watch. I think I really liked Otto's building. Something I did really, really like on Otto's side is I love the AG ring. I love Banded. While he might have had decent pivots into special, I think Banded AG had no pivots in that game. I thought that was a great, great breaker for this team, depending on set. So Band was great. I think SD also could have been good, but Band was probably the best set in the matchup. So I think that was really, really smart. His Mandibuzz was really annoying for Steve to break. The only thing about the set is that it was a little bit of fodder for Komodo. I think he was like foul play, toxic U-turn roost or defog U-turn roost or something like that. So that can always be scary because I do think Komodo was really terrifying versus Otto. I think it was definitely the biggest, scary thing for him to deal with. Though he did have the great Scarf Starmie bring, which I thought was really, really smart to bring for an insurance policy against things like the Komodo in the end game, because it's likely not getting up to +2 on his team. So I think that was very, very smart. The offensive Arcanine, I kind of talked about it in the power rankings. One of my issues with with Otto's team was that he was a little bit reliant on AG and potentially an offensive Arcanine to break in a lot of matchups, but this was one of the matchups where Arcanine was very, very good offensively, and I think it was really smart of him to realize that, bring Flare Blitz plus Player Off and Wild Charge. There wasn't any pivots on Steve's team for that set, and I think it was really, really smart just to be able to really punch holes through, still be a nice bulky pivot and things like that, and be really annoying and something in the morning sun up, but being very, very strong offensively. I think he prepared very well for this game, and I think he kind of just played his pieces correctly. I think the biggest downside was Steve letting that Drapion go down, but I'm sure that Shuckle will talk about it. What did you think about the game?
Oh yeah, well, side note, that was overall those two two serfs on the Drapion.
Oh man,
yeah.
I figured it was. I didn't think it would die if it was like analytic, because I forget if the Storm was analytic or not. Was it analytic?
It was analytic.
Yeah, because it did that damage. I was like, it's gonna live the next one though, so he's fine. Just throws a big hit, but oh damn, yeah,
and that's what all they thought too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, dang. And then I think Steve might have won that game if that ended up happening.
Oh yeah, so it was a low roll from the analytic surf into a high roll for the non-analytic. So it if he got like a normal roll from the analytic surf, it probably wouldn't have made a difference just because it would have done more damage. But yeah, no, that was a little bit hasty for Otto to just automatically go for the surf there because he forgot analytic, but it worked out for him, so that was definitely good. But yeah, now I help Magnitude with building as a behind the fourth wall here, so I'm definitely a little bit more strict on how Steve could have played that game, and I think he had a decent chance to win, and he played really well early on. He executed the plan well of tricking the Mandibuzz with his Reuniclus, so that way
that was a great break, and that was a great early game aggressive play. I love that play. That was great.
Yeah, that really just opened up a lot for his team to do pretty well, specifically the Como, but he just made a lot of unnecessarily aggressive switches because, well, first he was a Regenerator of Uniclus, and he tricked the Mandibuzz that had heavy-duty boots. So it was a Uniclus Regenerator with heavy-duty boots. So, like, even if he got rocks up, Uniclus wasn't taking that damage. A Uniclus was a super nice pivot in that game because it could regenerate HP, it ignored any hazards that were up. But he didn't really utilize Uniclus whatsoever, besides dying to the Aegis Slash to a Choice Bandit hit. So that was super strange. Like, he went into a Barraskewda instead of Uniclus when Mudsteel was on the field. And Mudsteel could have just done a crap ton of damage to the Barraskewda. Fortunately, he went for rocks there, but Uniclus could have taken 2 Earthquakes pretty easily. And with the Mandibuzz being tricked, a Choice Specs, like Shadow Ball was super free in that matchup. So it was weird that he didn't utilize that. There was another play where, well, he had the Barraskewda Ed auto switched out into the Weezing, knowing it could take 2 hits, and it was able to take 2, so that was fine. But then Magnitude flip turned into Manectric, which was a win con with Throat Spray, instead of going into the Uniclus and the Weezing, and then the Manectric was at 40% because Weezing went for an attacking a Barraskewda. So, like, just knowing what your win conditions are and making sure they're set up for, like, the best chance to succeed is just something you want to take into consider it in the future. But I like the otherwise. I think Magnitude played pretty well, and obviously I still like his team, so I have him at 5. And you have Magnitude at 6. So we still have Magnitude up pretty high.
It was a really good game. It was a really good game regardless. I was probably one of my favorite games to watch. And Auto played that
super well.
Yeah,
you
for sure.
Bumped Auto all the way up to 3 from 11. So I
really liked his... I think thinking back on it, I may have been a little bit too harsh on his team because it's not something I would draft myself. And looking at how well he prepared with it, I really do think that he played well, and I loved his build this week. I thought his build was phenomenal, and I'm really big on that too. A lot of my notes are talking about their builds because I think that's 50% of the game at bare minimum is having the proper tools to win, and I think he really did prepare well, and I value that really, really high when I look at a coach.
Definitely, yeah, and it gives us makes it a little bit easier to rank some of these teams when there is a team builder over not having one. But it is what it is there. But anyway, let's get on to game number 6, which is
CBAD versus Uzi.
CBAD versus Uzi. Yes, there we go. Okay, CBAD. What do I have him at number? I had him at number 1. Bumped him down to number 2. He did win. Uzi, I bumped down pretty far from 7 to 12. What did you do? You bumped CBAD up down to 2 as well.
Yeah, I have him down 1, and then I bumped. Where did I put Uzi? I think I have Uzi at 8. I had Uzi at 4 though. I had him a little bit higher than you last week.
Yeah, so a weird game because I really think Uzi should have won that game, but they both really didn't play that great. Honestly, I wasn't that happy with CBAD's win. I really like his team though, so I couldn't really fault him a whole lot there. Side note, he brought Terrakia Bandit that didn't add speed Hydreigon, which I just felt like that was weird. I mean, maybe he assumes Hydreigon's like gonna always be Choice Scarf in this matchup. So like, if he's gonna bring Choice Bandit, why bring a set that would add speed to Hydreigon if it's gonna be Scarfed and always add speed anyway? So I think that's definitely a fair regards, but if it weren't Scarfed, then that's a weird position when a Hydreigon like kills you with a Draco Meteor and you should normally outspeed. So that was just a weird bring there. But yeah, otherwise, I think CBAD played pretty well overall. There was a play where he went for, he had Worry Seed on Whimsicott, which was kind of weird, but I guess I kind of get it. So, okay, we'll start at the beginning when Uzi was setting up spikes. I think CBAD played that pretty okay. He had to let his Skarmory go down, but at least he made the play in the Gengar to not let something else get endeavored. So that was definitely not that bad. And then Uzi ended up not having a move that hit the Gengar, so that was definitely beneficial for him. Earthquake would have been, even though it was a -1 attack, Earthquake would have still done a lot of damage to that Gengar. So if you had Earthquake there, that would have been a lot better of a situation for Uzi. But so there's a play where Whimsicott was on the field against Hydreigon, and instead of going for a Moonblast to kill it, or U-turn, went for a tailwind, which didn't really benefit anything at all. So there are just some weird plays there, not really making much of a difference, but the end game, the end game was basically the whole battle when it was Espeon versus Orbital. And it was a really cool Orbital set that CBAD brought. The Iron Defense, Recover, Body Press, and Psychic. Psychic might have been a little bit of a weird fourth move, but it was kind of filler. It didn't make that much of a difference. But like CBAD should have won that game with the Orbital. There really was no way, unless if like Uzi got super lucky. And now Uzi did get a crit to a kill, but there were still ways where CBAD could have prevented that from happening because the SBOD was mono attacking Psychic. CBAD did acknowledge in the game that it was probably going to be a mono attacking Psychic, not mono attacking Shadow Ball, because he didn't have a Dark type on his team, so Psychic was pretty free. So that was good thought process by CBAD in that regard. But he definitely could have PP stalled out the Morning Suns, because he has 16 body presses. I think maybe like 14 after going for a couple earlier on other mons. But the body press was doing a lot of damage, especially at +6, even with the Reflect Up. You definitely could have gotten rid of all the Morning Sun from the Espeon. And with Espeon not having a Morning Sun, you're in pretty decent position to win that game. So I think CBAD could have played that end game better with the Orbital, but he still won the game. But it was also another weird play at the end when Espeon got the kill on the Orbital, and maybe OG's going to talk about this later, but he went into Whimsicott instead of the Terrakion on the Espeon, and I thought that was 100% the wrong play there. But I'll let OG talk about Uzi's side first, and then maybe I'll explain why I thought that was the wrong play.
Yeah, so Uzi, this was a very interesting game. I did like, a good majority of Uzi's prep. His Terrakion answers too. I think it's really funny because I didn't know he played CBAD week 1, and we were talking. I said the moment this team goes up against a Terrakion will be the end of Uzi.
Oh yes,
like that's
yeah. I think we mentioned that. Yeah,
this dude's Terrakion answers for nothing. So that was very interesting on CBAD's part. I totally forgot about that. Him being like a really bulky banded Terrak. Maybe he was really relying on that tailwind, but especially in singles, I don't know if that's the most reliable thing to be relying on. Just because you don't really get to utilize those turns well, because you tailwind the turn you set the tailwind, you waste a turn, and then you got to U-turn out or pivot out or something like that, and then you waste another turn, and then you have 2 turns left of the tailwind. I think it's better off just to be faster than a good majority of Uzi's team with the Terrakion if you just, creep correctly and things like that. But I really like the banded bring on CBAD, so really quick, just because Tangrowth is a decent check to set up, because you can always take a +2 hit, you pivot it on it before it sets up and things like that. So banded was a great way to say, no, I'm 2-hit killing your whole team. That was really smart.
Definitely.
But back to Uzi, I thought the Endeavor Scully was a great bring. Minus no EQ. That really made me upset, because if you're a lead, I'm going to take things down with me type set, I think you kind of want EQ on that set, so that the Gengar that can pretty much wall you at that point doesn't wall you. But it was really good being able to, 1, eliminate that Scarm, which is very annoying, and 2, limiting it to 1 spike while you end up getting up 2. I think that's really, really nice. And spikes were huge for chipping that Whimsicott, because I thought Scarf Hydra was really good in that game, because just the unreliable answer in Whimsicott. So being able to chip that thing down throughout the game, U-turning in and out and stuff like that, every time it has to come in on the Hydra, if it has to come in, take 2 spikes, take a U-turn, it just took like 35%, 40%, which makes it a one more time it can switch in on it basically, and then, be in a pretty bad position. So I thought that was very, very good. Though sacking that Hydra to Terrak early on in the game might not have been the right move. I felt like it left him wide open to Scarf Gengar. While Scarf Gengar obviously has coverage for, the Hydreigon, and Sludge Wave still does a lot, and Dazzling Gleam obviously blows it to the next dimension, it made it to where CBAD could just kind of lock Shadow Ball in that end game. So I don't know if that was necessarily the play. Another thing was the very, very unfortunate, play with the Fisk getting the para. It was obviously like the most ill-timed para of all time. Usually,
that was really unfortunate.
Usually you want it, but I do think he could have avoided it. I think he should have went hard Fisk initially. He stayed in with a Copper Jaw on, I think it was Copper Jaw, on 1 turn, and tried to get off damage as it was low enough to where it was forcing a recover turn, which probably wasn't the smartest thing because it did nothing. It got the recover up, did nothing, and then he went out into the Fisk. I think he should have taken advantage of the Fisk turn. Of the recover turn, gone hard into Fisk on the recover, and then tried to get that Toxic off on that turn, because then he just has, you know, a little bit better of an odds potentially to get off the Toxic. So I think he just could position himself a little bit better. And obviously Copper Dust still had its uses and things like that, or even just keeping it in the back as a sack, I think was very important. I really liked his Espeon set. I think it was a great set to obviously take advantage of No Dart, because Sidberry was a good bring for the Gengar as well, because that thing obviously can just be scarfing out speed and, you know, blow it backwards if it doesn't have enough boost, and you know, it lets him kind of boost up past it and not be super worried about it, because Espeon is the bulkiest thing in the world. He did end up getting that crit, which definitely did save him, but like Shuckle said, it was kind of due to CBAD not playing his turns correctly and not spacing his turns out correctly and forcing, you know, more recovers and things like that, really drawing out that interaction, and it was an inevitable crit. I personally don't really weigh a lot on crits in like bulky setup instances, because if you're sitting on the field for a long time and you're setting up for a long time, you're gonna get crit. It's just gonna happen eventually, and it didn't happen on turn 2. It happened on sitting in on it for like 15-20 turns, so that wasn't super crazy. My final notes on it though is it wasn't the worst game in the world. I just think CBAD positioned himself better in the early game to where he had more leeway in the end game to make more mistakes. I think Uzi maybe played the end game better, but he didn't play the early game very well in my opinion, so it kind of just set him very far in the back foot.
Well, Uzi could have played the end game where he could have won that game. And he acknowledged that in his video. But yeah, so I think the Espeon was around 25%, and he brought in the Whimsicott, CBAD did, instead of the Terrakion. Now, there was a Reflect Up, and a Quick Attack wasn't going to kill, but if CBAD was counting Morning Suns, so he might not have, but I feel like Morning Suns, it only has 8 PP, so it's kind of a pretty easy move to, like, remember, oh, he went for this many Morning Suns. I think that's definitely fair to you remember that many, at least. CBAD could have continuously Quick Attacked, and because Espeon had so few Morning Suns left, and Reflect was going to end on the following turn, there wasn't going to be an instance where the Espeon was either going to be at high enough health to where an Whimsicott would follow up with a kill with U-turn, or the Terrakion just ended up killing the Espeon. So I thought that was a weird endgame, because he went into Whimsicott and went for the Tailwind. Uzi definitely could have made a scenario, because he had a couple Calm Minds up, where he could have recovered, stayed pretty healthy, wait until the turn that Tailwind would have dissipated, killed the Espeon, and then outsped the Terrakion, lived a Quick Attack, and killed the Terrakion. So it ended up working that way, and CBAD could have like considered that and maybe U-turn into Terrakion with the Tailwind up. That would have been a super risky play, but it's something that CBAD could have done in that scenario, so it wasn't a 100% win for Uzi. So Uzi didn't put himself in a position to win the endgame at that point, but yeah, definitely CBAD made it a lot closer than it needed to be, so that's why I had to knock him from the number 1 spot. Oh yeah, for sure. It wasn't the cleanest endgame, but at least a win's a win. Exactly. He definitely would have still a little bit more if he ended up losing that endgame, though. That's for sure. Yeah, it's a heat of the moment, so it happens. So, let's go to Game 7, which is AIM and Feintattacks. This was a very interesting game. Very exciting. Some unfortunate stuff happened, but yeah. What do you think about this? So, again, I'm big on building, and I really liked AIM's build. I like the offense approach. We talked about it in the PRs. Feintattacks doesn't have the most reliable backbone versus certain things, like the really offensive Sylveon. I thought that was a great bring because his steel type is a Durant. So that's obviously really, really smart to bring. I thought the Quick Attack was clutch. It ended up coming up very clutch, getting the chip that Drill needed for the end game. And I loved the specs Noivern bring. Again, when your steel type is a Durant and your fairy type is a Hatterene, look how free that Hurricane, that Air Slash was versus him, especially with no Hatterene. Look how free Draco was. I will say, the crit, there's another reason why it was free. Yeah, there was a pretty good check to the Noivern though, and there was a pretty good check to the Sylveon, and it was setting up in the other game. It was Feintattacks Snorlax, which I did think was a great bring by him. I thought the set that he brought was probably the best set in the matchup, in all honesty. I thought it was very, very smart. Maybe barring the ability, I don't know if you need immunity if you're going to be resting up. Maybe you want to be thick fat, but again, I don't even think Joey has anything that really. I mean, I guess maybe Vanillix. I guess I don't think he has a fire type though.
unless I'm completely remembering wrong. But regardless, he set up his Snorlax to win in that early game really well, and I do think that AIM was very underprepared for Cursed Snorlax. I think he might not have looked at the calcs enough to realize that Gigalith set was never beating that Snorlax set 1v1, provided he didn't get a crit, which, to be fair, he did get the crit. And it's kind of one of those instances where I was just saying with the CBAD versus Uzi game that usually when you have fat, slow setup Mons, the Mon that wins is going to be the Mon that gets the crit first. However, he got the crit on the first body press, and that put Feintattacks in such a bad position. And getting so much chip on that Snorlax, which honestly I think won the game. The moment that Gigalith went down, just one more body press, I think that the Snorlax won the game. He had nothing to break through that, minus a couple crits.
Barring a crit.
Yeah. Which again could have happened, but it was very unfortunate for Feintattacks. I do think he definitely got a little bit greedy. He probably should have just killed the what do you call it? He probably should have just killed the Gigalith.
The Gigalith with the body,
with a body press, opposed to not killing it and things like that. Just because of, even if his Laxus ended up going down, getting rid of that sand element was so big for pokeaim's team. I think that would have been really, really beneficial for him in the end game. No sand with that drill means that drill doesn't just completely massacre that team. No sand for that Dougie. Definitely make sure that Dougie doesn't absolutely run through. I will say though, I did kind of shit on the Dougie pick in the draft.
I did it.
Yeah, I kind of shit on the Dougie pick in the draft. If you have a drill, why you pick a Dougie? I will say I did like the use of Dougie plus drill, because they really overwhelmed each other's checks, and on matchup, say you force in that Quag to take a bunch of EQs and things like that, you chip it down, you play aggressive enough, it really opens up the drill end game. And I think it was a great breaker for drill to potentially clean, which it did end up doing. He used Slowbro great as a pivot. He made a really good double at one point in the game with his where he doubled into his drill on the Talonflame switch on the Dougie, which obviously was showing banded damage. That was a really aggressive play and a really smart play because it was pretty no drawback regardless. And I really like that play, obviously. I do think that Feintattacks obviously should have scouted for the rock slide. He did still have a pretty healthy Quagsire in the back, and I think once the Talon went down, the game was pretty much over at that point.
Yeah.
But regardless of benefiting from the hacks a little bit in that game, I don't think a lot of it really ended up mattering. The Toxic Miss on Slowbro was definitely a little annoying because it gave him a much more free pivot and things like that. And maybe, I don't think it was the biggest deal though in the world, honestly. The Slowbro was poisoned regardless. I don't think it was too big. And then the Draco crit, it was annoying because he could have pivoted around it maybe, but at that point, I mean, Specs Modest Draco was doing so much to a Cofagrigus. I don't even know if it might have even killed from that range. I know it was at full, but
it would have lived.
It would
have done a crap ton of damage.
Yeah, and it 2-8 KO'd regardless. There's no way it lived too. And nothing wants to pivot on, even if it's -2, nothing wants to pivot on the Specs Draco on Feintattacks team because he didn't bring the Hatterene. So he didn't really pivot around it very well. And his Steel type is a Durant. So I like the really offensive approach from AIM, and I think he still would have won regardless of Draco not critting, Toxic not missing, things like that. I do think he might have lost that game if the Lax didn't get crit. I'll be 100% honest. I think he might have lost that game. But he was able to kind of bring the game back and really capitalize off the rest and, really set up an endgame for drill, which I definitely value. I think his build was great, and I think he played it very well outside of being a little underprepared for Snorlax.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you talked about basically all my points out for Feintattacks too. I think I kept Joey at 4 and I kept Feintattacks at 11 this week. So this game was really a wash after the Snorlax getting crit by the Gigalith. Feintattacks was, I felt like, as well, was in a pretty decent position to win that game. Granted, I think Feintattacks didn't automatically lose just because the Snorlax was low, but I think he the main misplay, again, which you talked about, was letting the Talonflame die to the rock slide. He definitely could have gone into Snorlax and sacked the Snorlax. That was the primary win condition, but it was going to be hard for the Snorlax, especially because it was asleep, to re-wake up and go for another rest. And then it would have been super passive, and the Durant probably would have 2-hit KO'd at that point. I also did like the Durant choice banded bring, because his ground resist and immunity was Talonflame. Everything else was going to be close to 2-hit KO'd, especially in the sand with Durant. Or not Durant, Dugtrio. So, yeah, that was a solid bring by AIM. But outside of the Talonflame, sacking it to the Escadrille, I think Feintattacks played that game pretty well. So I don't think I can fault him that well. Especially because I think he had a decent chance to win the game with his Snorlax.
Oh yeah, for sure. He and that probably results in a little tilt itself. I watched AIM side. I didn't get a chance to watch Feintattacks side, but I definitely don't think he played it awful. It was just not very good for him in that sense. I do think that no Kirim was kind of a sus bring though. I do want to say I think Kirim was very good version name, especially because he brought an offensive Sylveon. Kirim could have put on a lot of offensive pressure on pokeaim's team. So
that's definitely fair.
That was definitely a little sus in my opinion.
Maybe over one of the Quag or the Kofag, one of those two, yeah. Mm-hmm. He probably wanted a pretty reliable Earthquake switch in, and I think Quagsire is a more reliable Earthquake switch in than Kofag. So
maybe especially with the recover.
Yeah, Kofag for Kirim or Kofag for maybe a secondary Mon that could have handled a Noivern. Probably would have been
Lycanroc would have been nice too. Yeah, it's not really a flying resist, but it's something that can revenge it, or force some really scary switches on aim side because his rock resists are. He does have to deal with the drill and the the Dougie, but 1 CC and those things are getting sent packing. That could have also put on some pressure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about the last game of the week. My new number 1, and you have Emvee at 4. I have Emvee at number 1, overtaking CBAD. But that is Emvee versus Nexus. Where do I have Nexus? I actually bumped Nexus up 1 slot this game. I think you have Nexus. You have Nexus all the way down there at 12.
Yeah, I like Nexus.
You weren't too happy about Nexus play, but anyway, I think Emvee had my game of the week. I think he played the best, to get himself in a position to win this game, and I think Nexus also played pretty well. That's why I actually bumped him up because I think he played better than some of the teams that won this week. I think he played better even though he lost. But Emvee, I think we mentioned it before, building is at least half the battle, and I think Emvee built a team that won the game, made a lot of sets. He brought the best Dragapult set out there, which is Choice Scarf, and that was cool that he considered all the terrain, the unburden options with terrain Hitmonlee or terrain Driftblim. So he made sure the Dragapult was 100% going to add speed up, which is great ideas in prep. He did bring a bad Monbus gun tank, but I guess I can overlook that. I honestly, it's hard to really say much about Emvee's game in general. He neutered the Rillaboom with a Togekiss after seeing it wasn't a Grassy Seed Swords Dance Acrobatics. He knew that the Togekiss could handle the set very well, but Emvee made the safe plays, made the necessary switch-ins. He had a lot of bulk. There was one kind of weird play at the end that Emvee went into Bronzong when a Weavile was out in the field, but the Weavile went for triple axle anyway, so that was not even that bad of a play there. Eddie was probably going to win that game anyway. Definitely completely different than THATS's play style. That Emvee had a lot of bulk and had answers to every mon defensively. Maybe not necessarily offensively, but he could just whittle stuff down. And that's honestly probably the best play style, is to play the bulky and whittle your team down, and that usually will lend for you to having higher differential out of your games, and differential is a tiebreaker, so that's definitely a plus there for Emvee. But I think Emvee just had the best team that he brought going into the game and executed the plan perfectly. He didn't really have to make any aggressive plays, and it felt like Nexus was always on the back foot and couldn't really do anything about any of his switch-ins. And even Emvee missed 2 power whips, would have sent a Scourge on the Keldeo, and still had the game comfortably won. So yeah, impressive play by Emvee. Not surprised that he's number 1, and I think he's going to be number 1 for a lot of weeks going forward.
Oh yeah, I do agree. I'll touch on it really quick. I do agree Emvee's build was very good. I think 1, he had a great matchup, and 2, he really capitalized that on his defensive build. There was not one Pokemon on Nexus' team that he brought, at the very least, that really threatened Emvee, on the offensive side, barring maybe Weavile, but he still had counterplay Weavile. He didn't just lose to Weavile on matchup. He still had pivots around and things to potentially do for it. Other than that, literally everything was check ball. And I do want to kind of jump from Emvee's prep to Nexus prep, because there were a couple things I didn't really like about his build. Life Orb Swords Dance 3-Tax Rillaboom, I was not a fan of that bring at all. I think maybe the Rillaboom in general, it's definitely, potential mon that you can definitely bring it. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. But Emvee had such good counterplay to Rillaboom specifically on his team I don't think a boosting, offensive life orb set was necessarily the best idea. He has Dragapult, which can pivot around. Obviously, knockoff is going to hurt because it's life orb, but even non-life orb hurts. But provided the situation, he can pivot around it with that. He has Togekiss, which is one of the best checks in the game to it. It can't touch Togekiss whatsoever.
Nope.
He had the Centiskorch, which checked it. He had the Skuntank, which checked it. Literally almost everything on his team could somewhat deal with that thing, minus maybe like a Lantern or something like that. So maybe a different set or something like that could have been utilized with the Rillaboom. I wasn't a fan of that bring. And another thing was the Scarf Keldeo bring. I love Keldeo. Keldeo is one of my favorite mons in the format. I love it. And I think Scarf Kel is, a big menace in a lot of matchups. Though in this matchup, I don't think Scarf was the bring, and I don't think bringing Scarf, especially without Flip Turn, was the bring whatsoever either. Unfortunately, it didn't really break through his team and never wanted to lock into a move, and he had to play really aggressive with it and make a lot of doubles where if he was Flip Turn, not only was he getting that momentum on those obvious switch-ins, he was keeping up a little bit of offensive pressure and slowly chipping down things like the Lantern, where he likely wasn't going to be Water Absorb in said matchup, which is, a bit unfortunate. I think the Flip Turn bring could have really helped him, put on a little bit more offensive pressure. I don't think he played the worst, though. I don't think he played super awful. I like these Trace Guard for Lantern to, really deter it from wanting to click Volt Switch and things like that to kind of stop that momentum on his team, which definitely could have been really annoying for him to deal with, in all honesty. I thought he made a great double earlier in the game, getting in the Rillaboom, but then from there, he kind of made him a little bit of a misplay in getting that Rillaboom in on, I believe it was the Lantern. Instead of just throwing off a really free knockoff or throwing off a really free U-turn, he Swords Dance when there still is a Skuntank, there still is a Togekiss, there still is a Dragapult which can eat a hit pretty well and really deal with him in that sense. So I think that maybe it was honestly just a lot of the build, and it was a lot of the matchup. The matchup was pretty ass. He didn't have a lot to really capitalize on Emvee's defensive core. He just checked his team phenomenally, but I think he potentially maybe could have done a little bit better in his build. I think the Weavile, it potentially could have set up an endgame to win, though I do think another big issue was how Nexus dealt with the timer. Obviously, Gen 8 timer sucks. Everybody knows that. It's garbage. We look back at Gen 7 and we're like, man, I miss those days. And me too. I complain about it every single day. I hate LAN. I hate the fact that we have to do LAN, but we have to play the hand we're dealt, unfortunately. And I think he does really have to adjust to that timer. It's less than ideal, but you got to play the hand you're dealt, unfortunately. And you can't take 40 seconds per turn. You got to click a little bit faster sometimes. And I think towards the end of the game, well, I think Emvee pretty much had the thing locked up in the bag regardless, just because of his matchup and how well he was playing. He still potentially could have brought it back, but with some really out of his mind playing. But I think he got a little bit tilted towards the end when he's like, oh, I have 30 seconds left and we've played 20 turns. And he started playing really, a little too over aggressive and things like that, and not, dealing with his resources well and things like that. While Emvee was, just chilling at that point in the game. He was completely fine. So I think going forward, he just has to adjust to that. And I think just kind of realizing when to make the aggressive play, when to U-turn, when to make these doubles and things like that is going to be really important for him going forward. I think he has a really good team. I just think it was probably one of the worst matches for him to go up against week 1.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think Nexus can bounce back. He's so irritating. It's his watches are just so funny. But yeah, it's a downside, being the annotator. And being that into it, you might kind of forget about the timer and such. So yeah, just being a little bit quicker. I don't think he even noticed the timer was low until a minute left on his side. So
yeah, I think
after this week he'll be able to adjust, and I think he'll be in fine position at this point.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I think that's week 1. Yeah, we definitely made this a lot shorter than we thought it was gonna be.
Oh yeah, for sure.
A little sarcastic, but it's a little bit shorter than our week 0 at least. But yeah, no, this is a lot of fun. Let us know how you think about the layout in general we have about this. Anything you guys want us to improve upon. If you think our rankings were fair, or if you think someone should have been higher or lower, let us know. The week 1 Power Ranks you see are on my channel, and make sure you guys subscribe. But next week the video is going to be on OG's channel, so make sure you check out Ogalbina's channel and subscribe to him as well. Do you have any other things going on your channel?
Lots of leagues, too many leagues. we got BBR going right now. We have GDL going. I recently started up APA Little Cup, which is a league I run. So if you want to see draft format and, through a little bit of a different lens and a little bit different of a metagame, I love Little Cup. It's one of my favorite things to do. So that's a really cool breath of fresh air that I'm really excited to be doing right now. And just, little mini videos and discussion videos on the side. We upload pretty regularly. So definitely check it out if that's your cup of tea.
Yeah, great. And I'm also doing some coaching interviews. So last week I interviewed THATSAplusONE, and this week I'll be interviewing Uzi. Not sure when I'll be able to upload that, but they were both very interesting talks for sure. So you guys don't want to miss those for sure. Any last words before we sign off?
No, definitely go check out the coach if you haven't already, but I'm assuming you have if you're here. But yeah, I'm excited for week 2.
All right. Well, I think that's it. So until next week, later, guys.